And if there's a, I'm just going to be right there.
And so it starts.
It's coming, but it's fun. Yeah.
I need to see
Yeah.
and then we'll be gonna.
That would be great.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, they did it at the library, actually, several years ago.
Yes. Maybe we hear, well, yeah, Bob
So
definitely
he was very active.
introduced it a little bit.
He published here, and Manchester was looking at education in terms of, we're one of the cities.
Yeah, it was a, it went very good.
And, how do you change minds? How do you
Yeah, that'll be nice. I think it's an important thing to commemorate and to treat as a handoff. Well, it's a power field as well. It wasn't part of the year. But a lot of some of the pieces that are actually now part of this museum. So we're going to have a section that find these items. They're already in the No, I'm glad you did. Yeah. Great.
Oh, yeah.
We'll get started in just a minute. Wait just a few minutes. See if our guest panelists will show.
Yes. Yeah, so let me adjust it down.
That is the argument that's going to be.
I can shut those off too, that would. I'm trying to adjust it before it's setting.
Nothing's good.
If we move that forward, just have to move this forward. Yeah. Because my not have it on. Better? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming here today. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Millyard Museum. My name is Jeff Barraclough. I'm the Executive Director for the Manchester Historic Association, which operates this Millyard Museum. And we are
Recording
so
in
pleased
progress.
to host this Tea Talk with the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. Before I introduce Jerry Ann from the Black Heritage Trail, I just want to give a quick overview and welcome of who we are as an organization. The Manchester Historic Association was founded in 1896, and our mission is to collect, preserve, and share Manchester's history. We do that through this museum, which is open typically Tuesdays through Saturdays, so if you have not been here before, we welcome you to come back and visit our museum. We have exhibits throughout the year, rotating exhibits, as well as our sort of our permanent exhibit that explores the history of Manchester and its industrial history specifically. We also operate a research center on Amherst Street in Manchester, which is our library and archive, who would come in and do research on their families, on their properties. And we offer programs throughout the year, walking tours of the mill yard, of cemeteries, of different areas of the city. We offer lectures and events here at the museum as well. And I just want to highlight a couple of those coming up. One thing, we are participating this year in America's Tapestry Project. And this is a nationwide project that is in conjunction with the 250th celebration of our nation. And there are 13 tapestries being created throughout the country to represent the 13 original colonies. And New Hampshire's tapestry is being produced right here in this room. There's a bunch of material in the corner there. That is when our stitchers come in every Friday and Saturday to develop this tapestry that explores the New Hampshire's role in the Revolution, and specifically some of the often overlooked stories of those who participated. So that is being produced as we speak, and we expect it to continue production through early 2026. Once it's completed, it will be one of 13 panels that will go around the country on display, and we'll have all 13 panels displayed here at the museum as part of that project, probably in the next couple of years. So I say all this to say you are welcome to come on a Friday and Saturday and watch the stitchers in progress if that interests you. And it's really a great opportunity to celebrate our nation. Additionally, we have an exhibit opening coming up just in another week on Wednesday, September 17th, and it's called Amoskeag Revisited. And this is a recognition and celebration of a very important culture for the history of Manchester, an exhibit that opened 50 years ago this month at the Currier Museum of Art and the Currier Gallery of Art, that really changed how people's perspectives was on Amoskeag, the Amoskeag manufacturing company that built these mills and employed thousands and thousands of people and immigrants in Manchester. So we're going to be sort of reevaluating that exhibit. We have some of the text panels and big photographic panels that were used 50 years ago. We have those. We'll be displaying those once again and really celebrating the photography of Randolph Langenbach, who was the original curator of that exhibit and was an architectural historian that salvaged many pieces when the mills were being when some of the mills were being demolished during the urban renewal time of the late 60s. So that is coming up on September 17th. That's our opening in the evening at 5:30. You're welcome to come to that. But then that exhibit will be on display here for the next several months through the beginning of 2026. So I invite you to, if you can't come to the opening, come back at some point this year and see that exhibit. So I don't want to take up any more of your time, so it's my pleasure to introduce to you now Jerry Ann, who will be speaking about the Tea Talk here today, introducing our panelists. So thank you again for coming and welcome.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you everyone for joining us here today. It is my pleasure, our first time partnering with the Historical Society on one of our community dialogues that we call Tea Talks. And so we hope to do many more of them in the future, and you're all part of this. We encourage you to participate in this dialogue that we'll be having today after our presenters talk at the Q&A session. I want to just also thank our staff, which you met, Gina, Jake, and Daria, who worked tirelessly to bring this program here. And our sponsors, sure, we usually have a list of sponsors coming up, so I don't have to take them.
Rotating you.
There you go. Thank our sponsors. And I saw somebody from the New Hampshire Humanities here. I thought I saw another badge as well. Yeah, thank you for supporting us and making this work possible. And we all know the environment we're in, so your support has been really crucial for the work that we do and continue to do. So today's talk, am I following the right order? Anything else? I'm not sure if there was another screen coming up. Okay. Today's talk, The Great Migration, Military Service and the Shaping of a Diversified New Hampshire, is part of a series that we started in Portsmouth. The series, the Eleanor William Hooker Tea Talk series. It was inspired by Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and the series is called The Art of War, Conflict, and the African American Philosophy. We started that back in February. Those videos for those talks are available on our YouTube channel. You can see those at any time. The series presents a unique framework for examining how African philosophy of war, strategy, resilience, and collective action have shaped the African American experience throughout the century. Each conversation deepened our understanding of who we are, how we got to where we are, and ways in which that we can look forward to doing much better in the future. The first talk, Things We Carried, an African Philosophy on War, Surviving Enslavement and Citizenship. We explored the African cosmology and their philosophy on war, and how the enslaved Africans endured and coped with trauma of enslavement. The second talk, War and Strategies of Belonging. We looked at the significant role of African Americans in early wars, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, which served both as a strategy for citizenship and a powerful act of spiritual defiance. You know, we know next year is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and our talks really was to prime the conversation for when we go into celebrating the 250th. Our last talk in Portsmouth was really a future-looking protest movements and the road ahead, where we had a young panel of innovators, innovative thinking, leaders in talking about ways in which we can move forward through protest and movements. And today's talk really is about how the military integrated spaces. And since we're here in Manchester and in New Hampshire, we're looking at the bases that were built, why African Americans joined the military, and how they came to diversify New Hampshire. In today's session, through service, communities of color found new opportunities. They challenged barriers, and they reshaped the very character of the state. In expanding our tea talks, this is our, for this year, our first Beyond Portsmouth in Manchester, and we have one in Warner coming up. We honor a legacy of truth-telling and dialogue, while also recognizing that the history we explore are not confined to one space. This history, African American history, belongs to all of us. It is American history, and it shapes our communities and the lives we live today. So I hope as we continue our conversation that you'll participate, that we'll engage in very lively, energetic conversation, and I hope we leave here knowing a little bit more about each other than where we started. And it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Grace Kandecki, who may not need any introduction, but she does have a new title and a new job, so I want to congratulate her on that. After 5 years of being with the American Friends Service Committee, she is now the Program Director for the New Hampshire Center for Justice and Equity.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Jerry Ann, and thank you all for spending a Sunday afternoon with us on a very important and informative topic of conversation. So I will start by introducing our two panelists, and then I will share some opening remarks as I've done my research. I personally don't come from a military family, but I am an Africana Studies major. Being a Black woman in America, there's always so much nuance in history that I feel like I'm always continuously learning, and I'm excited to share with you and hear from our panelists. So our first panelist today will be Leah Dearborn, who is the Associate Director for the Aviation Museum here in Manchester. And then our second panelist for today is Irvin Scales Jr., who is a culinary specialist and a first-class submarines qualified retired United States Navy veteran. So please give a hand of applause for our So, as I was doing research in preparation for moderating this panel, one thing that I came across, one of the many things that I came across, is in the recognition of how military service has shaped not only Black American identity, but also Black American liberation and justice work in this country. And so, throughout much of our U.S. history, Black Americans have used military service both as proof of equal civic worth, as well as leverage to demand legal and social rights from our government, which so often has treated Black Americans as second or even third-class citizens, if even that. Serving under the flag had created moral, political, as well as legal arguments that veterans, organizers, civil rights activists, and civil rights institutions have repeatedly used in order to press for suffrage, desegregation, federal protections, equal rights, and benefits underneath the law. So even while oftentimes Black service members have experienced discrimination, violence, institutional exclusion, when they returned home, that service background gave many the means, the foundation to be able to fight for not only their own rights, but the rights of their community members and family members as well. So the unfortunate reality is that service did not always automatically equal acceptance. There was often violent resistance to veterans asserting their rights. Federal actions always mattered. They laid the foundation, but oftentimes it was local level implementation and private discrimination in the ways of redlining, housing discrimination, discrimination through financial discrimination, and even the discrimination at the academic level that often would limit the gains that veterans would come to expect. So this pattern is one of repeated assertions. So each generation of Black service members have used service as part of a broader strategy for inclusion rather than as a guaranteed ticket. So it's always been a strategy with the mountaintop as the end goal in sight. It has, because of the moral and rhetorical leverage, veterans would often argue that we fought, we bled for this country, and deserve its full protection and equal rights. That moral claim was incredibly powerful and has carried through even to this day. The organizational and leadership capital that veterans were able to claim, because the military service gave individuals not only the skills, the networks and legitimacy that would later translate into civic leadership. So oftentimes a lot of our civil rights leaders had military service backgrounds as well. And then of course the legal and political pressure on the federal government through mass Black enlistment and the visibility of Black service members' sacrifices has pressured national institutions to act and be able to meet the demands not only from Black service members for equal rights, for equal benefits, but also for recognizing that in order for us to meet not only our values and who we say we are as a country, we must be able to reckon with the disparate treatment that Black service members and their families were experiencing. And so I will close out by sharing a historical example. One of my favorite historical figures that I am always honored to learn more about is, of course, Harriet Tubman, who many people knew as a suffragist, as a conductor of the Underground Railroad. But she was also not only a nurse in the Union Army, she was also a spy. And she was the first American woman to lead a military campaign, a military expedition. And through her work during the raid on Combahee Ferry in South Carolina, which was that first time that an American woman has led a military expedition, she enabled the freeing of over 700 enslaved Black Americans at the time. And so, despite her service to this country, she was only able to receive a pension for her nursing service and for being the widow of a U.S. Veteran. And so it wasn't until modern times that not only was her military service as a spy, as a scout recognized, but her life and example really shares an example of that continuous fight for not only recognition, but equal benefits under the law. So with that being said, I will pass it over to Leah to give us a little bit of background and history.
Great, thank you very much. Do you want me here or up at the podium? Grace, can I comment? We
Yes.
cannot really see that because of lighting. If
Sure.
that's a support to us.
Yeah, well, okay, we will fix that for you. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Okay, well, thank you very much to the Black Heritage Trail and the New Yard Museum for having me here today. My name is Leah Dearborn. I work for the Aviation Museum of New Hampshire, which is just up the road if you've never visited it. It's by the Manchester-Boston Regional Airport. And so as a result of my work there, I focus mainly on aviation history, but that dovetails really strongly with currents of military history. You can't really separate the two things. And as a result of that work, I started digging around in our archives and finding out a lot about Grenier Air Force Base, which was located on the site of what is now Manchester-Boston Regional Airport. And I'll get more into that in a minute, but I just kind of want to quickly acknowledge the long legacy of Black military service in the state of New Hampshire. It's certainly not something that's new. There were many Black soldiers who served from New Hampshire during the time of the Revolutionary War. It was a trade for freedom from servitude. Unfortunately, the commission that they earned from doing this was paid to the slave owner. Manumission in the state of New Hampshire did not formally happen, I believe, until the Emancipation Proclamation. So I think that's something that is worth knowing about the state and knowing about the struggle of Black soldiers who fought here. During the Civil War, there were a number of soldiers from the state of New Hampshire who served in the 54th Regiment. If you've ever been down to Boston and you've seen that St. Gaudens gate with the men on the horses, that's the 54th. And there were several men, Black soldiers from New Hampshire, who served in that very storied unit. So a lot of my background and my focus has been on later on in the World War II years. As I mentioned, Manchester Airport was a base in itself, but let's kind of set the scene for a second. Back in June of 1941, FDR issued Executive Order 8802 that banned discriminatory employment practices by federal agencies and unions and companies engaged in war-related work. But it's important to note that that was defense-related work. That was not the actual armed services. The U.S. Armed Forces were not actually desegregated until Executive Order 9981 in 1948 after the war ended. During World War II, 2.5 million African American men registered for the draft, with over 1 million inducted into the armed forces. In addition to thousands of Black women, these inductees served in all branches of the service and in all theaters of operation during World War II. And so this kind of leads us to Manchester. So not very far from here, there is this massive base, and as you can imagine, when you have thousands of people serving in a community, it really alters the landscape of that community. The War Department announced Manchester's selection as a new Army Air Corps base on October 3rd, 1940, and at the height of World War II, it hosted up to 6,000 servicemen, but over the lifetime of the base, which ran from 1939 to 1966 officially, over 50,000 service members passed through Manchester. And they came from all over the country. You can kind of see what Manchester looked like before the base on the top, and then only months later on the bottom. It was this massive boom in development. Conflict in Europe caused a lot of bases to be built up on the East Coast. There was this urgency to it of wanting to protect the coastal zone. The Battle of the Atlantic was ongoing, so there was this notion of protecting areas that were close to where there could be a sea invasion. During Grenier's heyday, over 500 tactical aircraft arrived per month with a one-day high of 107. And from where we're sitting now, you would have seen those aircraft back in the 1940s. That's how close we are. And a number of the people who served on this base were Black. as I was trying to find out more about who served here and what their roles were and what the history of the space was, one thing that I found in our archives was something called the Beacon newspaper. It was a newspaper that was printed on the base for its duration, and in the 1940s it talked about, you know, it could be anything, different updates on the squadrons, what was going on in the soldiers' lives, what they were doing for entertainment, what was happening politically and in combat overseas. And pretty quickly I found out that the people who were writing this particular newspaper were primarily the black soldiers because they were in the communications units. So as a result of that, it really provided a window into how they were feeling, what their days were like, the music they were listening to. And here you can see an image of the aviation squadron. They provided a lot of support to the operations of the planes on the base. And here they are being honored as the top bond fundraisers on the base. As I mentioned, because the base was segregated at the time, there was a separate barracks area for the black soldiers during World War II. I've tried to find out more about exactly where that is, and we're running close on time, so I'll try to be brief. Basically, it's tough. There's some notes that show what might remain. There's a foundation in the woods, but that's about it. So we feel like that's why this is so important to do this work, to remind ourselves of the sacrifices that these soldiers made. The barracks were not built to last for a long period of time. They were not very comfortable. Here's one of the gentlemen who was in charge of writing the Beacon. His name was Hutch, and he was a pretty well established writer. And I'll just kind of wrap up by quickly saying that at the time, a lot of the units who worked on the base in Grenier, while they had black soldiers in many of the positions, they didn't have black officers. However, this particular group, the 366th, was an exception to that. They also had black officers. They, and where you see them right there, that is them arriving here in Manchester. And their job was to guard railroads, shipping lanes. They were stationed all throughout New England, and they protected against any incursions by German forces, in particular for espionage. And they were unusual in one other sense in that they were also actually shipped into combat, which was at the time unusual for black soldiers. And I guess to just kind of wrap this up and dovetail with some of what else we've been talking about, unfortunately, because they were not given the training and the resources that they needed to be successful, it was a massacre for them. They fought very valiantly in Italy, but lost many lives. And it really resulted in some of their members, upon returning, running for political offices, directly as a result of his time here in Manchester and then abroad. Edward W. Brooke then entered a law career, ran for the Mass House State of Representatives, became the first black politician from Mass to serve in Congress, and then became the first senator to publicly call for President Nixon's resignation later down the line. So all this to say, the conflict of World War II massively changed Manchester, New Hampshire. It changed urban planning here. It changed the demographics and the population of the city. And it changed history, what people experienced during their service and what they came to do afterwards. And so that's all for me. I'm the author of Air Base, A Beacon on the Home Front. It's a book that the museum published. If you're interested in learning more about this topic or about Grenier Air Base, you can find it, I believe, here in the bookstore or at the Aviation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. And so we'll pass it on to Irving as our next panelist. There'll be plenty of time for questions at the end, so definitely keep percolating.
Well, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I consider it an honor to be here today. When I was asked to do this, I was contemplating what should I really focus on. You already got a little bit of background on me. I'm retired Navy, 20 years. But what you don't know is that my first duty station was actually here at Portsmouth Shipyard. I reported to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in January of 1989 on my first ship, the USS Bluefish. I was a seaman recruit, and I was unqualified in submarines. I was learning basically. I just came from what we consider school in the Navy. I had just finished graduating from submarine school.
Sorry, Irving, can you talk in the mic because we can hardly hear you?
Can you
Yes,
hear me now?
that's better.
Okay. So I had just graduated from submarine school, and I was being sent here. And honestly, when I got my orders here, I asked, is there even any water here in Hampshire? Because I do absolutely nothing about the state. Going forward, I learned the area very quickly, very swiftly. I actually met my wife here because she was a resident of National New Hampshire while I was stationed there. Now, we didn't get married at the time, but I met her there. She was still in high school when I was fresh out of high school. We were separated by 2 years. So if I never had came here, I would have never met her. So this is the love of my life. We've been married 26 years. Love them and my children here. But my experience as a service member is not only unique, but the service brings the service, or I should say the sub-service that I was in, is a very unique community in itself. In the submarine force, the population of black people is about maybe 4%. Okay? There are at least 20,000 submariners, and we make up 4% of that group. Okay? So, needless to say, I'm normally one of one. So my perspective is a little bit different. Being that I'm a culinary specialist, my background is in food service. And people often tend to say, well, you're just a cook. Well, in order to be on a submarine, number one, you have to volunteer. Number two, you have to understand physics. You have to be able to understand nuclear power. You have to understand engineering. You have to understand piping tabs. You have to understand hydraulics. You have to understand HVAC systems. You have to understand a myriad of knowledge just to be a submarine. But then you actually have to go and put that knowledge to use to become a qualified submariner. So being a submariner is not an easy task, and it's even a more daunting task because being black, at the time you were looked at not necessarily capable of doing these things. In the early part of American history, when submarines were first being utilized during World War II, but they became prevalent because of the use of Germany's submarines. African Americans could only be food service attendants. They were called stewards at that time. No matter what their mental capabilities were or what their aptitudes, they could only become cooks. But even as a cook, you're a vital part of the crew because your job is to maintain and feed your crew and feed them the best way possible in the most arduous conditions known to man. So you have to be very good at what you do, because they will let you know if you're not good at doing your job. So, with that being said, the standards of the basic military standards are all the same for everybody. The expectations are entirely different. When you're 101, you're focused on a little bit more than everybody else. So you have to be better than everyone else just to be average to everyone else. Okay? And this discussion has been had throughout generations. My father served in the Army, the Air Force. My father served in the Air Force. I had 3 uncles that were in the Army, and I had one who was also in the Navy. As a matter of fact, he was one of the first navigees in naval history. His name is Daniel Holmes. And he also was stationed here in Portsmouth Shipyard on the USS Billfish. Okay. Little family history. And we are the only 2 civilians in our family. Civilian, I'm sorry. And because of our conversations, that's what led me to come somewhere. Because he was trying to be very depth about what he did. So I have a very unique perspective as to service and enlisted. So moving forward, understanding that these things are being scrutinized, you're being scrutinized in this way, right? When you are an African American in the military, you always focus on how are you presenting yourself as the best that you can be. Okay? And you don't get involved in the minutia. You let your work and your ethics speak for itself. And even after my service to the Navy, all of my shipmates still hold me in high regards because they knew my work ethic. They knew how I cared about them. They knew that I loved them. No matter what the issues were, they knew that I loved them. And my focus was on making sure that they had the best meals that I could provide them. So with that being said, you know, there has been progress, but we still have struggles even today. And it's still prevalent, and there's still certain biases. But I have not lost faith or hope that these things will continue to change. So as far as that's concerned, I am all set. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me anything you want to know at the end of our session. And to everybody, you guys have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you so much, Irving, and thank you, Leah. So I have a couple of questions to get us started, but certainly as you have questions, we will please raise your hand so that we can be sure to call on you and we can hear your question. But my question directed to both of you is, you know, Leah, you gave us this historical perspective of Black service members, you know, who were here, you know, decades ago, you know, in New Hampshire. And Irving, you give us this perspective as a retired Black service member. And so my question for both of you is, what do Black service members continue to fight for? What were they fighting for, you know, back around World War II? And as a retired vet, what are Black service members still fighting for? I know things have changed a little bit, but sometimes it often feels that, you know, the fights continue generation after generation. So could you give us a little bit of perspective in terms of that?
Well, during World War II, I think something that came up a lot was the Double V campaign. The idea that victory wasn't just won abroad, but Black service members were also fighting for equal rights back here at home. And I think there's a lot of hypocrisy that continues to this day. But at the time, there was this notion of we're fighting Nazis overseas,
But there were that unit of men that I showed you on the screen who were here as guardsmen in New Hampshire. When they were returning from combat, they were told to go to the back of the bus so that Nazi prisoners of war could sit in front of them. And I think that that's a pretty important thing to know about our history as a country, and I think that there is still some of that hypocrisy today, and I think we need to be aware of it.
Thank you.
I like to study history, and I am very much in agreement with her, because even during World War II, the United States had a very active Nazi party, still functioning and thriving here in the United States. So you find that strange. You're fighting a war against a party that you still have operating in your country. You know, that's a little strange. You know, we can discuss all that, but I mean that is very hypocritical. And your other policies still focus on belittling the people who are fighting, who's fighting your wars for you. Okay, so there's a lot of hypocrisy with that. Moving forward into my service, we always had to be aware of who we were dealing with. There were many altercations between our shipmates based on racial aggressions. So these are supposed to be my brothers that I have to fight just to be treated fairly and as a human being and not be disrespected. And I have to go to war with these guys, you know, and trust that they will have my back like I would have theirs, you know. Now, I can honestly say over time that respect is there, but initially, when I first reported to my first command, my first supervisor, who was not in my rate, who did not do the same job that I did, when he found out I was on board and I was going to be attached to him, he flat out told me right off the bat, "You belong to me now, boy, and I'm going to work you like this and this and this and this." The only thing I could do was be like, "Okay, I'm a kid, I'm new," but I just did exactly whatever he asked me to do. Whatever he asked me to do, I just did. Now, he would go and check whatever I did after I did it, but I did exactly what he asked me to do, right? And he, not only did he check, but he would thoroughly check. As soon as I said, "Hey, I'm done with this," he's like, "You done?" You take off. Look at what I was doing, whatever I did, and you say, "Okay, I want to do X, Y, Z." I go do X, Y, Z. You done? Go check. You know, and I worked with him for my first 3 months. So after I came up under him, I worked with my division, and we actually were alone at that time because we were running back into work. We sketched the bus down to the ship, and he was actually the duty driver at the time. And he said to me, he was like, "Scales." And I was like, and his name was John Gilstrap, I'll give you his name. He said, "Scales." He was like, "I want to tell you you're a good man." And I was like, "Why you say that to me?" He was like, "All I knew of black people was what I heard and what I was told. But you have shown me that black people are not that way. You worked hard, you did everything I said to do, blah, 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 blah." And I was like, "Well, I'm glad that you tell me this, but why did you feel that way?" He was like, "I just didn't know any better." You know? And we're friends to this day, but that was him being honest. Now, would you have said that out in public? Probably not. But because we were together, you know, we had that personal talk, and he explained to me, you know, basically what he thought basically coming up. You know, I like, most people are like me. Okay? We don't want anything, we do our jobs, you know. But I'm glad that we had this conversation, you know, and this is real, this is not made up, this is real life stuff that I'm talking about here. This happened, you're looking at a recipient of a person who had to do this. So, you know, if you choose to get to know who we are, then you find yourself pleasantly surprised all the time. But it's a choice. It's a choice.
Thank you, Franz, for those thorough and really real answers. I have one more question, but I just want to check in with our tech team here if we have any questions from the chat or anything that's coming through.
I've got one. Did any of the Tuskegee Airmen pass through the base in New Hampshire during World War II?
Okay. So did any of the Tuskegee Airmen pass through the base in New Hampshire during World War II?
So there was one who I found an anecdote briefly in a newspaper article that he passed through before going on to final training at Tuskegee. There are connections. We actually had a P-51 Mustang at the museum, and that brought out a man who is still living. His name is Howard Carter. He lives down in Mass, and he served as a Tuskegee at the very, very tail end of the war. He trained at Tuskegee. So there's not a lot of real strong connections to the base, but there are a lot of connections with the Tuskegee Airmen throughout New England, families with those connections. Bob Shepard is another local. He lives here in New Hampshire, and he's spoken at our museum. His father was a Tuskegee. So, like I said, not a ton of like really direct ones, but they are around.
Wonderful, thank you, Leah. And then I have a question for you, Irving, in terms of how did military service shape and impact both your family life and your community life?
Irvin, sorry, can you hold the mic up so that the folks online can hear?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's right, thank you.
Okay, this way, okay. So, how did military life impact my family life and as well as my community life? So, I have 3 children. My boys have been with me the longest. My oldest son, he experienced a lot of good times with us. Even with that being said, I was gone a lot of the time. Being on a submarine, especially at that particular time, I was on ballistic missile submarines at that time. So I was going out to sea 3 months and I was home 3 months. The common question that I get is how long was I out to sea, or did we stay out to sea? The longest I've stayed out was 87 days underwater. So 87 days, yes, that's just about 3 months completely underwater. And submarine duty is arduous duty, but it's good duty. And the friends that you make, you have for a lifetime. So as far as that aspect is concerned, it was good, and I have, friends that stay in contact with me. As far as it affected my family, being away for the amount of time that I was away, you miss a lot of stuff. I would come back and my son would be like an inch taller. My middle son, he was born literally right before I went out to sea for like another 3 months. I held him in my arms as a baby. I was gone. I didn't even recognize that was my son because he was so big the next time I saw him. And my youngest child, my daughter, she was born before I went back to see her. We had her when I was on shore duty. So my last 2 years of shore duty is when we had her. And my boys are my boys, you know, it's just, hey, guys, hey, I'm gonna be gone, I'll be back this month. Okay, all right, see you later, Dad, love you, blah, 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 blah. My daughter, however, was an entirely different story. Hey, sweetie, I'm leaving. Where you going? Well, I have to go out to speak. No, you can't go. Baby, I have to go. No, you can't go. So she takes off, she runs to the front door and she blocks the front door. Okay? Because you can't leave. I'm like, sweetie, I have to go. No, you can't go. I'm like, I have to go. So I walked away from her. Now she's on her way. Okay? So, and this is close to the end of my career, so it was like, you know, the boys, I was ready, the boys were ready, the baby was not. And that string, that string right there was like, yeah, maybe it's time to hush go. Maybe it's time to hush go. So, that's another truth.
Thank you so much. And it looks like we have our first audience question. Yes, so I'm gonna get up. I'm gonna give you the microphone. Ooh.
So, Irving, you said that the submarine force was about 4% Afro-American or Black. In your particular, where you were working and your submarine, how many other Black people were there with you?
Oh, and take that mic.
So I can give you the breakdown by boat. So on my first boat, there was 5 of us, which was considered a lot. But primarily, there were 4 out of the 5 were in my division. 1 was a Navy T and 2 were nukes. So with me, that made 6. So we had a lot. That at that particular time in Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, there were about that many on pretty much all the boats, at least 6 or 7. So at that particular time, there was a large amount of naval Black African-American submariners. And then we had the USS Kamehameha pull in 1989. And I had never seen as many Black people on the submarine in my entire life. They had like 15. It totally blew my mind. I was like, this is unheard of. So we had the Kamehameha 15, the Bluefish had 5, 6. The Japan had 5. The Bonefish had 5. And I'm just listening on the boats that were in the yard at that time. I had never experienced so many African Americans that were on submarines located in one place at one particular time. So that was a very unique experience for me, because when I went to my next submarine, that number jumped from 5 to 3, me being 1. Correction, 4, and I was on the USS Maine, Commissioner Maine. So there was myself and another supply guy. We both were Black. We were on one crew, and there were 2 more on the other crew. Okay, and then when I went to the Pennsylvania, there was 6 on one crew, and there was another 6 on the other crew, because both those ships had 2 crews. And then on my last boat, and I wasn't sure if I was going to bring this picture, but I decided not to. I have a picture of all my first classes on my ship, and there's 27 of us, and I was the only one. So.
That's what I was wondering.
Let's get you the
Right, so out of, like, when there were 4 or 5 or however many you said, that would be out of like a crew of around 27, is that?
No. The basic submarine accompaniment is 150.
Oh,
Okay, that's basic submarine accompaniment. On a Trident submarine, it's 175. And I have to take it back because on my first boat, it was 1 black officer. On the next boat that I had, it was 1 black officer. When I was on the Pennsylvania, there were no black officers. And when I was on the USS Philadelphia, which was my last boat, there was 1 black officer and 1 mulatto officer. That was, he was mixed. And they weren't there at the same time.
we get the idea.
Needed to get a hug in there. Were you segregated in terms of your bunks on the boat? And were you segregated in terms of the housing on the base?
No, we weren't segregated.
That is so good to know.
No, we were not segregated.
It's only one. Well, on the boat, I mean, you had 5 or 6 people on the
No,
boat.
we weren't segregated. The only thing that only segregation was by departments and by messes or by groups. So the first classes, we all had our own separate berthing area. The chiefs had their berthing areas. The officers had their berthing areas. And the rest of them, they were all mixed. But that was the only segregation. So it was all by rank. That's it. That's the only segregation I had.
How did you find or build community with other Black service members that you met while in the service? And how did meeting others like who look like you, how did you guys support each other? And how do you guys find like solace in each other at that time? And then I have another question, which is how does the military service, or at that time, how did they support your wife or your family?
You have to learn about the different aspects of the jobs, and you have to go have somebody in that particular division or whatever test you or quiz you on your knowledge. And sometimes, your knowledge will be weak. So those people I would go to that I would discuss the things that I need to know, and they would help me and they would bring me up to speed on what I need to know. Because when you're qualifying, whoever you go to for the knowledge factor, if you go to them, you have to go back to them to get their signature. That's the only way that is recognized that you have met the qualification, or you have proficient knowledge in that particular thing. So you can't start with somebody and go to somebody else. If you went to that person, you have to go back to that person, and show them that you have increased your knowledge, and so that they can sign your card. And then once you're done, you have to turn that card over to the qualifying officer, and then you have a board. So we have to learn from the people who give us knowledge. So that's our board ship. Now, outside of this ship, once we met each other, so what we would do is we go hang out, and we spend time together as a group, hanging out, i.e. going out to parties, going out to nightclubs, just going out to eat, and in some cases, going out on dates. So that's how we interacted with each other, and we support each other, and we were, you know, if I couldn't get what I needed from somebody on board the ship, well, I had somebody who was on the same class of boat on another ship that could give me the knowledge. So that's how we would work with each other.
So you guys like really, so you guys like just really help each other like study and like be in community with each other and just making sure that you guys are like always checking in, making sure that you guys are always good. Like that's how you guys support each other, is making sure that you guys are all successful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because even though we were on different ships, we all live pretty much in the same bridges. So different floors had different ships, you know, associated with it. So I would just go downstairs to one of my brothers on another ship and be like, hey, can you show me X, Y, Z, blah, 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 blah. Explain this to me, right? You know, if I was working on hydraulics and I didn't understand something about hydraulics, explain this to me, all right? What aspect don't you know about? Well, I'm working in this section right here, okay. So you got this piece of equipment, this does this, this does that. Let me map it out for you so you can understand it better, you know, so that you have, you know, so that you can relay this information back to whoever you speak to. So that's how it would go.
That's really cool.
Before I go on, so I'm going to give you a little tidbit. So, for advancement purposes, you know, junior sailors will learn more advanced systems, i.e., senior wash stations outside of our rate. So, I'm going to give you an example. So, everybody sees in the movies the Humphrey Red. I told you got a guy that they call the chief of the boat, right? And you have the guys who are steering the ship and all that kind of stuff. Those are watches. So junior people will man those watches. So it doesn't matter what rate you are, unless if you're forward, that means you do everything for the ship. That means you're the general rates, like the cook, navigation, quartermasters, mapping out your plots. Repeat and those will be considered four jobs. And then you have nuclear jobs that are in the back end of the ship. So that's the real separation of the crews. You have the port and then you have the aft command. Okay? In order to be the chief of the watch, you have to understand how to function in all aspects of the ship. So what me and one of my partners did, we studied together to learn how to be chief of the watch as junior sailors. So we were second classes. The chief of the watch station is generally for E7 and above. We learned those watches as E5s. We qualified those watches as E5s, right? We both were black. He was in the SK department, was the storekeeper, and I was in the culinary specialist department. But we learned those watches together, and we both qualified. And because we qualified those watches, that made us eligible for advancement to the next pay grade sooner, because we qualified those watches. So those type of interactions definitely benefited my staying in the Navy.
Later, what Irving just said made me think of something you said about the man in the 366 who went to war without any training. And Irving's talking about that he's learning from his friends. So what is the history of training and preparing our soldiers for war as men of color?
So there was this notion, thank you, during World War II, there was this notion that troops of color, I don't know exactly where this began, were less aggressive and less fit for actual combat. And as a result, many of them served more service-related positions around the base, as guard members, and various sort of backup roles. But the result of that was there were groups like the 366 where they, for various different reasons related to different skills and needs and gaps in coverage over combat, did actually get sent overseas. So what happened with the 366 in particular was they did get shipped off. They got sent to hold the Gothic line over in Italy, and they had some training, but it had been a long time. There had been this assumption that they would not actually see combat. And that was why, when they got there, it was really difficult for them to be sent directly into battle. And they held on very valiantly. They were actually recognized with the Congressional Medal of Honor in the 1990s, but it took a long time for them to be recognized in that way. And I don't think their story is totally unique. I think when I, speaking about this at a different event one time, there was a woman in the audience who came up to me afterwards and said that her grandfather had the exact same thing happen to him. That basically they had been told they were being trained for these service-related jobs, they weren't going to be sent to combat, and that he actually was, and they were unprepared for it. So that is something that happened during the Second World War.
Liam, another question for you. A comment was made early on in perhaps your presentation about how many of the people, black people who came for the services, didn't know New Hampshire, were coming from different parts of the country, ended up settling in New Hampshire. So that implies that they put down roots that, for whatever reason, it became their new home. And I'm curious about that piece, both how they came to settle, but also how they were received in the communities. I'm sure this was during different times of service, back to World War II and since.
Yeah, so one resource that I found on this topic actually came from here, the Manchester Historic Association. One of their members, Aurora Eaton, had done a number of oral history interviews with USO workers. And USO workers, the USO was sort of the social heart of the base. It was where people went to interact, to dance. They were, during most of the war, they were not segregated by rule or law. It became something that happened socially. But through these interviews, there were a number of USO workers who did not like that, who actually found that to be inappropriate and wanted to see more interracial interactions. There were also a lot of field trips off of the base into Boston, and I think somewhat as a result of this and people being moved between bases, like they might be coming from Fort Devon in Massachusetts, I think sometimes it was more of a regional spread because, as I mentioned, people came during the war to this site from literally everywhere in the country. And some of them developed homes, as you say here, and stayed, some did not. At the height of the war, there were, I think it was 800 black service members stationed here in the base in New Hampshire. I don't know, does that fully answer your question?
Do you know how the communities received these people?
It was a mix. Like I said, some of the USO workers reported getting along well, wanting to interact more, wanting to see more integrated interactions, whereas others, there was, I read about in the newspaper, the Union Leader, there was an old piece that was about a fight that broke out at the First Street Cafe. There were a number of black soldiers who were just eating their lunch, and then there were a number of soldiers who came. It was reported in the article from the Deep South, but I think who truly knows what the situation was here, that there was a skirmish. Such things did happen periodically throughout the 1940s. Also, I will add that something that was interesting when I was looking at this was I looked at yearbooks for graduating military classes from the base. And over time, you could see that they became more integrated when you were looking at like the faces of the yearbook. Through like the 50s or so, the dynamics of who was coming here did start to change a bit as well.
Just a quick question here, in furtherance of understanding more about, you mentioned earlier that there's a small percentage of sailors that, so I want to try to understand a little bit better about how did you get in there in terms of, I mean, what's the process to you mentioned it's voluntary, and how does that work? Is it, it's just a lack of understanding that's an option, or is it something else that's preventing that further population?
Right. So submarine force is voluntary. With that being said, you are subjected to a myriad of various things once you do volunteers. First of all, you have to have the aptitude. So you have to meet the minimum score. So you take the I forget what the military entrance exam is, what it's called, but you have to take the military entrance exam, and then your scores gives them a baseline of whether or not you can possibly even volunteer. So your initial score gives them a baseline. Your initial score lets them know what jobs that you can qualify for. So if you scored, let's say you scored 86, 86 could mean that you can be a corpsman, which would be an HM, or you can be a machinist mate, or you can be an amputee, or you can be a cook, or you can function well in these particular types of jobs. And those scores also lets them know whether you have the aptitude to become a submariner. And then you have to verbally volunteer. You have to sign that you're volunteering to become a submariner. And then once you decide that, then they send you to submarine school. It's called Basic Enlisted Submarine School. You can go to Basic Enlisted Submarine School. You have 2 months to retain all the knowledge that they put into you in those 2 months. Okay? And when I say retain all the knowledge, that's exactly what I mean, because they pump in 6 months of college in 2 months. Okay? And you have to retain that knowledge. While you're getting pumped this knowledge, you're also being psychologically evaluated. You're also being tested on your knowledge daily. And pretty much everything is pass or fail. You pass, or you fail. And if you fail, you give an opportunity to retest again. And if you fail the second time, you're out of the program. It's just that simple. You're either going to pass or you're going to not be in the program. And once you finish everything that you go through, because you go through firefighting, so you go through a firefighting simulator, you go through a submergence and evacuation simulator, you have various simulators that you go through. You go through flood simulator, right? All of these test your mental capabilities. All of these test your mental capabilities and your reactions. And if you pass, then you're sent to a submarine. And then once you go to a submarine, then everything else that I discussed applies. You are tested on board the ship and your understanding of that particular ship. Because every ship is different. Every class of ship is different, so your knowledge is tested on that particular class of ship. Every time you go to a different submarine, you have to go through the process. If you've already been qualified, it may not be as in-depth, but you still go through that process because you still have to learn that particular ship. But your basic knowledge is there once you finish submarine school.
one compared to the worst submarine? Which one, what's the difference in detail about a really good running submarine and one that's like okay?
The command structure, the command structure is what makes it either the best or the worst. Because if you have a good command structure, the morale is better throughout the ship. The knowledge factor is better throughout the ship.
Yeah.
The camaraderie is better throughout the ship. The pride on the ship is better throughout the ship. So the command structure directly affects that.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh,
I have a lot of questions. Someone had asked about family support. Back to how your family was supported. What community locations were available to your family to support you while you were away?
We had the Family Service Center that was available. As far as education is concerned, we had in the Family Service Center we had education part. And I haven't thought about this stuff in a long time. But the Family Service Center was a direct resources for pretty much everything for housing, for education, for not only myself, but for my family members. You had the thrift store, you had the military thrift store for uniforms, because even though you're in the military, it's not like our uniforms are cheap. And they do have to be maintained to a certain standard. So you had the thrift store, you had the commissary, you had the Navy Exchange, you had the exchange, and pretty much all the bases have pretty much the same thing. They might be called different things. They have the same support systems. You had the Naval Hospital. I was fortunate enough that my base had its own hospital in Brighton. We had military welfare and recreation. So if you wanted to go camping or you wanted to do any of those kind of activities, there was equipment available to rent at very low premiums. So there was a wealth of opportunity. You had the enlistments club, we had the Chiefs Club, we had the Officers Club for entertainment, nightlife, socially. You had the movie theater, you had the fitness center. So pretty much anything that you wanted or you needed to do, to maintain your health and your wellness and to enjoy yourself, you could do on base. Some of those activities have changed as of late, but most of those activities still, you can find out most bases. Does that answer your question?
And you mentioned that you served on, I think, you served on boats. You mentioned the Trident. What's a Trident?
The Trident is a missile class submarine. You had what was called Moors, which were the first missile class submarines, and then the Trident class became known as the D2 missile platform. Trident class platforms, D2 missiles, shoot D5 missiles. They hold 24 nuclear warheads apiece, with the ability to stay submerged at least 3 months at a time.
And what's a boomer?
Boomer is the previous class of submarines. I mentioned the command man. That was the boomer, one of the boomer class submarines.
And okay. When you were in the military, was going to college ever mentioned to you?
When I was in the military, it was mentioned, but I didn't understand exactly how to pursue that. We had what was called correspondence courses. We did correspondence courses. So a lot of things that I learned was through correspondence courses. Most of my grade training courses, if I didn't actually physically learn by doing, I did through correspondence courses. But it wasn't until excuse me, it wasn't until now you're just having something stuck in front of my face. It wasn't until I want to say 1995 that I absolutely pursued looking at getting a degree as far as college is concerned. When I came in to the service, before I came into the service, I knew that my parents couldn't afford to send me to college. My older sister, she was already in college, so that would have put two of us in college at the same time. And honestly, I was prepared. I was mentally prepared, knowing that I know my capabilities at the time. So I wasn't really introduced into looking at going to college seriously. If it wasn't for my wife talking me into pursuing my first college course. Okay, she's the one who's asking this question, by the way. So I didn't think I had the mental capability of going to college until I took my first course. And once I took my first course, I pursued my degrees that I have. My associate's is in business, and I also have a bachelor's in applied studies in management. But if my wife hadn't talked to me, I would have never pursued it. I looked into going into officers programs while I was active, but I didn't, quote unquote, have to apply to go to college because the testing that I was doing would align me into pursuing a degree as an officer. And I had taken a couple of them and I was accepted into one program, but I was in a different relationship at the time and I didn't go forward with that. One of my regrets, you know, I probably would have had a degree a whole lot sooner, but you know, everything works out in God's time. So I do have my degrees, and I'm very satisfied.
I have a question, and then we're almost out of time, so we have a couple more, but this is a real quick one. Lay, nowadays, when you think of the military, people go in for travel, they go in for education, right, for a college degree. When did that start? Do you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, World War I to a certain extent, but I think World War II was really what broke sort of the dams wide open when it came to opportunities for people of color, but also women in particular. There were all these people who were going overseas, and that opened up both civilian jobs, but also just so many opportunities through the military itself. There were new roles that were created, new things that people could do that they had access to for the first time. So I think education in the 1940s was still a reason to join the military. There were a lot of people who, instead of waiting to be drafted, chose to enlist so that they had a better pick of where they would be, the kinds of skills that they would learn. My own grandfather, I know, did join the Navy, actually at Portsmouth for exactly that reason. It was because it gave you the opportunity to learn something. But I think something that really stood out to me in doing this research was people really wanted to serve at this time because they felt very compelled to. So I think that was a strong component, at least in the 1940s, of getting people to enlist in the military.
Another question to you as well. Well, the air base that is in Manchester, was there a lot of women of color was on that base? Do we have a lot of knowledge of that as well, of black women served? In my history of my knowledge around the country, around the United States itself, a lot of black women did list it, but they're not really being recognized, attributed to a lot of things that they attribute to. Like, for example, there's a movie out, I do not know the name of it, that they literally was the ones who kept the mail going.
Yep.
That's one piece, but that was huge, major, but they not really be talked about. Now, other women was across the United States and abroad. So, do we have a lot of knowledge if that one of the women or a lot of women was on the base, or how did that come about?
I wish I had better numbers on the number of like exact women who served on the base, how many of them were black, if any. One thing I can tell you for sure is the group that you're talking about, I believe was 6AAA.
Yeah.
Yep. They were a group of black women who they were assigned with the task of sorting through all the mail overseas, and there is a new movie about it. There was a woman from Portsmouth who was part of that. She was honored by the state recently. I wish I knew more about her story. But on the base here, as far as women go, there were a lot of auxiliary groups doing work during the war, a lot of civilian military positions as well, like Rosie the Riveter, things of that nature. But there were the Women's Auxiliary Corps, the WACs. There were hundreds of them on the base, and they also did sort of support roles, logistics, supply chain, things of that nature. And they also came in from all around the country. I've been trying to find out more about some of their backgrounds. One thing that I've quickly found is when you get into, because they weren't formally recognized by the military at that time, women's service records from the 40s tend to be really spotty. So a lot of the time it has to kind of come to me through oral history or by chance or a newspaper article. If there's anyone here who ever like bumps into some information on that, I'd love to know about it.
I'm sorry, Rosemary Cooper is one person in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, who worked at the Navy Yard when all the men were gone, and she was in charge of the cranes at lifting the submarines out of the water, and she operated the largest crane in the country at the time. We only have time for one more question.
Real quick, Irving, back to you. Not sure, where did you start? Where did you enlist? Was it in New Hampshire? And then what brought you back to live in New Hampshire in the end, after your career?
All right, so originally I am a native of New Jersey. I came into the Navy out of Haven, Connecticut, because I graduated high school in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And I wound up in Portsmouth, coming to my first boat. That's how I became familiar with New Hampshire when I was on my first boat. What brought me back to New Hampshire was when I retired from the Navy. Me and my wife were in discussion, and she was like, where do you want to live? I'm like, I don't really care. It doesn't matter. You know, and she was like, well, I want to be closer to my mother. And I said, okay, if you want to be closer to your mother, that's what we're about. And my wife grew up here in Nashua, so, and her family was here in Nashua, so that's how I wanted to live in Nashua.
Can I just ask a couple really simple questions?
My husband was retired Navy, so I can relate to some of the stuff that you're talking about. Just a couple of quick things. He was on a destroyer. He wasn't on a submarine. He was on the USS Caperton. What were the beds like sleeping? Okay, let me tell you what he told me on his ship was no one had their own bed. Like when he was on duty upstairs, someone else was sleeping in the bed downstairs, and then it reversed.
Okay, They call that hot racking.
Okay.
So, the reason why they call that hot racking is the bed is warm when the next person gets in. Because somebody just got up, so we just have time to cool.
So yours was the same way?
No. Because I work in food service, I always have my own sleeping rack. I always have my own rack, so I didn't have that issue. So I was blessed in that but the only way I can describe, you notice when you ask that question, I mean, you need to start looking at this table. This is about it. Maybe tack on about another 4 inches, but that's the sleeping space.
Another just quick question. Once he retired, we used to go to reunions for the USS Caperton, and it was wonderful, you know, getting back together. Do you have that opportunity to go to reunions on some that you were on?
Yes and no. It feels weird to say this, but almost all of my submarines have been decommissioned.
Well, his was too, but, you know, his, I think, is at the bottom of the ocean, but we still, as a group, got together.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with the surface side too, because I mentioned my submarines, but I was also on the surf ships.
Okay.
So I was on the USS Fulton AS-11. It's the only surf ship I've been on, but it's a submarine tender. And we do have reunions. So I think our last reunion was a couple years ago. I was not able to make it at that time. I think I was in transition between jobs. I got the notification, so I couldn't make it. But yes, we do have some, and with Facebook, we actually have a page for pretty much each of our posts. So, you know, if you're on the page, you know, we stay in contact, we talk. Every now and then, you know, we get an update to what's going on with one of my shipmates, and their family members or whatever's going on, somebody's events. I especially keep in contact. I call them all my babies, because as the lead culinary specialist, pretty much all of the junior personnel actually have to come through me, and they work for me for a time period. So I keep track of all my babies. You know, I know how they do, and I know what's going on with them. I celebrate their advancements. Once I find out, I make sure I contact them whenever they make the next pay grade. I'm just amazed that, you know, when I think about it, I've almost been retired 20 years at this point. I can't even believe I'm saying that. But I love watching the progression of, you know, my young sailors grow into competent and capable men throughout their careers and how they advance.
It's great to keep contact.
Yes.
Thank you.
So real quick, the woman from Portsmouth who was in the 6th AAA is Doris Moore. She was born and raised in Portsmouth in 1916. She joined the Army in 1945. Google is great. I just could not remember her name. And I know she got a Congressional Gold Medal in 2022 when they started recognizing the 6th AAA. And just because it's you, and we're out of time, I'll allow you to do the last question.
Thank you so much. Okay, it's kind of two-part. My first question is for Leah, right? My first question is, you are the associate director for the Aviation Museum. So how does the museum engage with the Black community locally or nationally when curating or designing exhibits about maybe the Black military experience or history, and what maybe barriers or conflicts, maybe not conflicts, but struggles have you gone through trying to accurately represent this?
I would say a lot of the struggle is the fact that even today, the aviation industry is overwhelmingly white male. It's a very female Black pilots are such a small minority, and something that sometimes is a little bit of a struggle is saying we need to recognize this. We need to do more to engage these communities. But from a historical lens, finding those individuals who we can showcase and who we can highlight. And also we're the Aviation Museum of New Hampshire. So finding, I think, role models that we can connect kind of the dots between, we like to say that we celebrate aviation history past as a way of moving aviation forward into the future. So I think a struggle is always kind of connecting those dots of finding those role models historically and also in the present day so that we can bring aviation to these communities and make it seem like something they can do. I think representation is really important. I think if you don't see yourself represented in an industry or the history of an industry, I think it, even just kind of subconsciously, you don't feel as accepted. It feels like a barrier to entering it. So it's something that we are trying to, in an ongoing fashion, engage with, but it is difficult when the industry as a whole is still so predominantly white and male.
Thank you. And my last question is for my dad. What advice would you give to Black military service members, maybe currently in the military or just entering?
The advice I would give anybody is if you really actively want to enter into the military, know what you want to do, okay? And if once you know what you want to do, before you join, try to get as much information or as much skill in that craft, okay? That's what I would tell them. And then I would also tell them not to limit themselves to just looking at whatever craft they want to get into, but looking at the managerial, i.e. the officer side of whatever that craft is. Okay? Because too often we, I don't want to say marginalized, I want to say the aptitude is there, but the guidance is lacking. Okay? So I would look into pursuing a career as an officer in whatever branch of service that you're looking to go into, as well as knowing what job you want to really get into. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much to both of our panelists. Let's just do a quick round of applause. So I think what we've heard today, I mean, is incredible history of Black military service here. I hope you all have left with something, a little bit of new knowledge, as well as the experiences of a retired Black military service member. I think what we've heard are stories of resilience, of strength, of finding ways through no ways, of utilizing military service in order to support one's own dreams and also to support a family. And of course, other fellow service members who are navigating a really difficult system that in one ways really exemplifies some of the best of our country and some of the worst aspects of our country. I think it is absolutely incredible. I so appreciate, Leah, the information about Grenier Air Force Base, the fact that so many Black service members worked there, contributed to that base, and as well as contributed to what Manchester, the Manchester we now know, what Manchester would eventually become, despite the mixed reception they received, both on the base and then off the base that they decided to settle. I think it is so incredibly important that what you both raised is the barriers that Black service members have experienced, the discrimination and what that looked like in practice, and the reality that like despite those barriers that there was still Black excellence on full display and making the best of a situation and putting your all into the work that you were assigned to do and doing so in such a way that it literally changed hearts and minds. And I think that is what you, Irving, especially what you shared is what is pride in service, is the legacy of not only what you've accomplished, but the legacy of the service in your own family, how that has shaped your family now, sitting before us, and the family and the community that you became a part of. And that even though the cost of long family separations, racial aggression, limited jobs, that it's still, like you used what you had and you made something great out of it. And I think that is so much the legacy of Black military service is that, you know, despite the limitations, greatness still prevails. And that greatness has shaped our country and continues to shape our country. So I thank you all for spending this Sunday with us to hear these stories. I thank the Black Heritage Trail for hosting these talks. It has been the utmost privilege of my life really to be both moderator and speaker in past talks, and I'm just so grateful that you all exist, because having grown up here as a Black woman in New Hampshire, I've spent my whole life in Manchester, it's my hometown. There's still so much Black history that has yet to be uncovered, and the fact that you are all doing this good work of uncovering it and lifting it up is so critical, and I'm so deeply grateful and appreciative to all of you. I want to thank all the volunteers for taking the time to set us up, to put out refreshments, to just do all the small logistical details that make these things run so well. So thank you to the volunteers, to the tech team, and certainly, of course, to our sponsors for making these talks possible, because certainly that support, without that support, it wouldn't be possible. So I want to make sure that we are honoring the fact that this program was made possible by a grant from New Hampshire Humanities again. So much thanks to you all, especially in a climate where, you know, the arts and the humanities continue to not be funded or appreciated the way that they should. But we know that things will change, because everything is temporary under God's big sun. And so what is current now will not be what is current in the future. But thank you all for prevailing and continuing to support these programs. And just to make sure that you all have it on your calendars, the next expanded Tea Talk, which is called Hopes and Impediments, War and Strategies for Belonging, will be in Warner, New Hampshire on September 21st at 2 p.m. And of course, please also mark your calendars, hold that date. It's one of the most important conferences of the year. The Black New England Conference will be on October 25th. And of course, as always, if you would like more information or get more details about the conference, as well as the Expanded Tea Talk series, please visit www.blackheritagetrailnewhampshire.org. So I'm your moderator, Bruce Kadeke. Thank you so much for being here, and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your evening.
Sorry, before we go, I just really have to say this. It's not a public service announcement, but in doing our research, when you erase a history, when you erase or you get rid of people who had to struggle to get to the top of the, I'm trying not to be political, which is really hard. But when you get rid of your top brasses, it takes 3 generations before you can get to that place where you left off. 3 generations is what our history has shown us. So, vote.
Yes. Amen. Thank you.
And I would like to thank the Historical Association for hosting us. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.